Yes, indeed, Francis. The NPA has provisionally withdrawn the case against several Gupta family members and associates in terms of their involvement in the Estina dairy farm project in the Free State. That case was meant to return to the Bloemfontein Magistrate's Court on the 4th of December. The NPA had until Friday to hand over the finalized docket and indictment in the case, and it's alleged that 250 million rand intended for the upliftment of poor black farmers was siphoned to Gupta companies. Earlier this year, the High Court in Bloemfontein ruled it wasn't satisfied there was enough evidence connecting that money and in Gupta assets to the alleged scam. The NPA did not attempt to appeal against that ruling. The prosecuting authority has revealed it's working with law enforcement in India and the United Arab Emirates to try and gather more evidence. Well, to try to give us some more insight on this case, we're joined now by legal journalist with Tiso Black Star, Karyn Maughn. Karyn, good evening to you. I mean, what's extraordinary about this case, this was meant to be the smoking gun, if you like, particularly, of course, linking specific people to the Gupta project and perhaps even wider issues of state capture. Why are we here?
Well, first of all, on your first point, you're absolutely right. I mean, you couldn't have more powerful symbology than, black farmers who are desperately trying to succeed, who have money intended to provide them with cows so that they can start looking for themselves, looking after themselves and their families, allegedly siphoned off into Gupta companies. But what went horribly wrong for the National Prosecuting Authority, and we saw this in the asset forfeiture unit cases linked to this matter, was they simply struggled to prove that that money had in fact gone to those Gupta accounts. There were multiple different applications, 3 in all, in which the NPA sought to freeze Gupta assets or companies that they said were embroiled in this alleged scam. Every single time they went to court, the Guptas then challenged them, produced Bank of Baroda bank statements to show that in fact the conjectures of the state were not accurate, and every single time those cases were overturned. Fast forward, clearly under the whip, clearly needing to show this kind of deep money laundering web, the prosecution, the Hawks, go to the UAE and India seeking mutual legal assistance and essentially come back with nothing, to a point where they are unable to finalize the indictment and put the Gupta family members and associates on trial, and really with their back against the wall, because the magistrate in this case had said, if you don't hand over the indictment on Friday, this case is going to get struck from the roll, which would have been very embarrassing for the NPA. So I think they decided, before that happens, let us withdraw this case and let's withdraw it on our terms.
All right, just talk us through the complications, because of course I understand there were monies that had been paid to shelf companies in Dubai and that sort of gone there and really found a mirage.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, different companies have very different legal environments, and when you bring a request for mutual legal assistance, countries will make you, and particularly in the UAE, which has, got all these kind of tax implications, etc., they are going to make you jump through hoops, and you're going to have to bring very substantive evidence to back up what you're saying. But in addition to that, if it's a shelf company and the funds have been moved out, and you're not entirely sure where they've been moved to, oftentimes in that legal environment, you must have a sense of where that money went in order to be able to request the information.
So it can't be just a fishing expedition.
It can't be a fishing expedition. These countries will not allow that kind of litigation, because obviously it would infringe on the rights of people within that environment, and they wouldn't want to be seen to, kind of support practices that are not fully entrenched in their own legal system.
Right. I mean, look, it's a catch-22 in a sense, because if you're going to make the allegations around the elaborate nature of state capture and the system and the networks it took to build it, you would obviously then also have to accept that, the trail wasn't going to be that easy for you to find. Talk to me then about the individuals that have been charged here, family members of the Gupta family and their business associates.
Well, Varun Gupta is obviously the nephew of the Gupta family. He had, there was a whole issue around the way in which he'd been charged, because the NPA admitted that it had mistakenly identified him as a key role player in Oak Bay, when in fact he'd been a non-executive director. There was a whole furore around that. Nazim Hawa, someone who was very much involved in the Gupta empires, including the media empire. The Gupta leak emails reveal him to be, engaging with a number of people implicated in so-called state capture. Ronica Raghavan, the acting CEO of Oak Bay, and then of course, some very Ashu Chola. And then, of course, some very high-profile people within the agricultural department in the Free State. Peter Tabete, for example, who was a key role player in terms of setting up the so-called Freda Dairy project. And it will be interesting, he has lost his position, but it's going to be interesting to see whether there's an attempt by the people within that government to try and get greater answers and bring clarity and also accountability to those individuals involved.
The NPA says the case is not dead, but are they just putting a brave face on it?
I suspect that unless they get some serious assistance forensically, and I think this is across the board with the NPA and the Hawks, they're going to struggle to bring this case back into motion. Lest we forget some of the other cases that have been withdrawn, not least of all, of course, was the one against Julius Malema for the Ratanang Trust. Once you see cases being withdrawn, particularly in complex corruption matters and these kind of cases, it's very rare that you see them reintroduced. The NPA will say differently. They're going to get a new head very soon, and they will want to be seen to be coming forward on the front foot with state capture. But just what we've seen in those multiple court judgments, what we've seen in terms of what they need to prove this case, they really do find themselves in a very difficult position.
Some of the politicians implicated in all of this, of course, would be Mosebenzi Zwane in his role as the former Agriculture MEC, Ace Mahashule, the ANC Secretary General. He was the Premier at the time. When the Gupta leaks came out, they had the line of, until these have been authenticated, we don't need to answer any questions. Given all we've heard so far in terms of the State Capture Commission, this kind of withdrawal does embolden them, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, in the case of Mosebenzi Zwane, the Gupta leaks, seem to show that he and his gospel choir, while he was the Free State MEC for Agriculture, had been flown to India or Dubai as part of an all-expenses paid tour right before the Estina agreement went through. When he's been implicated in terms of the IMC, the Interministerial Committee on the banks, his involvement in that. He will feel that now he has been vindicated. We will see that language coming out of it. But of course, these individuals, the Gupta leaks have been accepted provisionally into evidence at the state capture inquiry. We know investigators are combing through them. And I think, there's a real potential here that if this inquiry does its job and is able to do the kind of forensic investigation that's been so rampantly absent from the NPA thus far, you may have the scenario where South Africans are getting answers about what happened here at an inquiry, but an inquiry that doesn't have the legal power to prosecute. And that might be one of the great kind of tragedies and travesties of what we see, is that we know the evidence is there, we just at this stage don't have an NPA that can do anything about it.
So people may not necessarily pay the kind of price we may want, but at least we will know. Karyn Maughn, thank you very much for your analysis there. So that case, obviously, we'll watch how it develops in the coming months. I suppose it may be a while yet before we see any action on that one.